Okay, so today we are doing my monthly wrap for the month of June. Let's take a look at some of the statistics. Starting off with the genres section. So this month I read 10 books, a total of 10 books, and they were split into 4 different genres. I read 4 fantasy books, 1 mystery, 3 dystopians, and 2 sci-fis. Over to the age group section, of my 10 books, I read 9 young adult books and 1 adult book. And to the page numbers, I read 1 tome and a half, 3 tomes, and 6 half tomes, which came to a sum total of 4,951 pages, which turns out to be roughly about 166 pages per day. Now, this is not what happened for me this month, but if we take the total amount of pages read and then divide it by the amount of days in that month, that is the average, 166 pages per day. As for my star ratings, you can see them right there. So I have 4 5-star books, 2 4-star books, 3 3-star books, and 1 2-star book. So, what were the books that I read this month? Well, we're going to find out right now, and as we do, I'm going to be able to put the books away where I want them to go, because for the majority of this month, this shelf right here, where you can see my Harry Potter books, was my June what I've read TBR shelf, so now I get to put everything exactly where I wanted to put it in the first place as well. So let's do this. Let's go through these books one last time, the books that I read for the month of June 2020. And the first book that I read this month was a book I'm trying to get. There it is. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. This is a book that I believe I gave 5 stars to. Yes, it is. Sorry. A little bit underprepared, but that's okay. This is a book that I gave 5 stars to. It follows Harry Potter in his 6th year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Of all of the books that I read in the series, which I have finished the original Harry Potter series, I've read all 8. Is it 8 books or is it 7? Just trying to work that out. It's 8. No, it's 7. It's 7. Oh, goodness me. So this is book 5 out of 7. If we include Cursed Child, it becomes 8. But if we don't include Cursed Child, it's 7. I finished the whole 7. And this is book number 5 in that series. Anyway, this is the longest book by far, and it was so very enjoyable for me to read. This is the only tome and a half that I've read this month as well. There was a lot that happened in this book, so every page was well worth the effort. I gave it 5 stars, and I highly recommend this book. And now it goes into its permanent spot here on the Harry Potter shelf. So the second book that I read this month was this book, The Last Smile in Sunder City by Luke Arnold. This book received 2 stars from me, and I was incredibly disappointed with the execution of this book. The premise of this book is that it follows a detective whose name is Fetch Phillips. We're doing really well today. Fetch Phillips, who is an investigator for magical beings and magical creatures. However, he is an investigator for those beings and creatures in a world where magic no longer exists, but the creatures still do. I thought this was going to be a really interesting read, but it ended up being really dry as far as I was concerned. It's personal preference. I felt the writing style as well as the plot itself was rather dry, but also the protagonist, Fetch Phillips, was also incredibly dry, so it made for an incredibly dry read, and I did not really enjoy myself with this one. But I felt that there were a few things that saved face with this book, such as learning about those creatures despite the fact they don't have magic, which ultimately is a tease because you can't see them do what it is they used to do. You still do get to learn about them. So just based on world building alone, I could not give this book 1 star, but aside from that, I really didn't enjoy myself at all, and so this book ended up getting 2 stars. You may love this book though, and if you do, comment below and let me know why you loved it and also what you thought of it. I would appreciate knowing. But anyway, this is the second book that I read this month, and it's time to now put this book away. So below my bookshelves, I have a set of drawers. My second drawer is my DNF drawer, and while I did not DNF The Last Smile in Sunder City, I feel that it is the most appropriate place for that book to go. I have limited bookshelf spacing behind me, and so I really only want to display the books that I really enjoy or had a really big impression on me. So The Last Smile in Sunder City has gone into the DNF drawer. The third book that I read this month was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Now, this was interesting because my reading started to derail a little bit once I started reading this book, but I must say that I enjoyed it enough to give it 3 stars. I'll just confirm that. Yes, I did give it 3 stars. So this book is a multi-perspective book. It follows the perspective of 6 different characters who are part of a crew who are trying to pull off an impossible heist. What's really interesting about this book is that this book delivered for me where other books don't normally, and where other books normally do, this book didn't. So what I mean by that is that I'm a plot-driven reader, and I did not enjoy the plot of this book at all. I'm not a character-driven reader, but I enjoyed the character arcs so much in this book, so I'm not going to be picking up the second book in this Grishaverse duology because I don't think the first book did enough for me to want to continue with the book. But yeah, plot I just did not enjoy, but the characters I found to be really amazing, and I would recommend it to anyone who loves traveling / questing tropes. If you followed my channel long enough, you know I don't like that kind of thing. So if you do, then I would recommend you pick this book up because it's pretty good. It's been quite popular on BookTube. A lot of people have reviewed this book. So you take it for what you think. For me, it was a 3-star book. So I've just moved Eragon and Inheritance out of this section because while I read Eragon, I don't plan on hanging on to it. In fact, I plan on giving both Eragon and Inheritance to a friend of mine. It's just with the lockdown, we haven't gotten there yet, and that same friend will get all of my Lord of the Rings books for the exact same reason. But now that I've been able to clear that section, that is where I'm going to be placing Six of Crows, right here. So that brings me to the 4th book that I've read so far this month, and the 4th book that I read was J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. This is the only Harry Potter book that I deemed to be less than the optimal 5-star rating. Every other Harry Potter that I read received 5 stars. This one received 4 stars. So this book continues on the journey of Harry Potter at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It is the second last book, making it the 6th book in the original series, again if you don't include The Cursed Child. I found this book to be an enjoyable read, but there were things in this book that annoyed me a little bit. There were certain things that did not make any sense to me, and I have read this series many times, so I think it makes sense as far as storyline is concerned, but it doesn't make sense necessarily as far as the world building of this Harry Potter universe is concerned. And being that this is the 6th out of 7 books, you kind of get to the point where you feel like you know the world and how it works, not necessarily what's going to happen, but how things work in the world anyway, and there were some things that just didn't make sense to that in this book. I also found there were some moments that were lagging in this book that I just didn't find to be that interesting, but overall I did give it 4 stars. I just think comparatively to the other books, this is my least favourite, but it still holds up to be a good book, so I do still recommend it to anyone who wants to read it. And now I'm going to put it in my Harry Potter section. And there, as you can see, it's now there. So I do ultimately want to replace the cover of that book and the cover of the last book because they are different versions to the first 5 books that I have. So I am going to replace that in the future. But for now, we'll just leave it with that cover. So to the next book that I read this month, and that book was the second book in the, right here, Hunger Games series, and that is this book, The Hunger Games Catching Fire by Susan Collins. So this book is a dystopian, a YA dystopian book, and while I enjoyed, let's say, the first 5th of this book, there was something that I really wanted to see going into this book. relatively early on there is a plot twist that occurs that ensures that what I wanted to see in this book did not actually occur, which was extremely annoying for me. And then there was another plot twist that came right towards the end. I'm not going to spoil either of them, but I will say that they've impacted on the way I now look at the Hunger Games. Because, yeah, I went into this book wanting to see something and it couldn't happen because of the first plot twist. And then with the second plot twist, yeah, I don't even think it's going to happen in the third book either. I do have the third book, Catching Fire, on my July TBR. It is the third book I'm going to read. Third book in the series, the third book I'll read for the month of July. And I am incredibly anxious going into that one because I just don't feel that this series is headed in a direction that I want to be headed in. So we'll have to see how that all works out. But ultimately, I ended up giving this book, I'm just going to find out, 4 stars. Because I thought, all in all, it is a good book. It's just, I was certainly annoyed by the fact that I wasn't able to witness what I wanted to. But aside from that, if you go into this book with no expectations, it's a pretty good book. So I did. I felt that had to factor into my rating, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't feel guilty about it, and that's why this book received 4 stars. And this book is going to go into my dystopian section over here, so I'll go and place that there right now. Okay, so I will eventually have to turn the selection book around to make more room for this shelf, but yeah, for now, there we go. Hunger Games up there. We will have a buddy for Divergent soon enough, but in the meantime, the next book that I read was this book, Scythe by Neil Shusterman. I thought this book was a fantasy, but I found out after I read the book that it's actually a sci-fi, and that really surprised me because it deals with the fantastical element of, call him, her, it, what you will, the Grim Reaper, the Angel of Death, whatever it is that you want to call it. To me, that is a fantastical being, so for me, I thought it was a fantasy book. It's a sci-fi. I didn't feel that it read as a sci-fi, I felt that it read as a fantasy, so I just think it's being advertised incorrectly, but that's just my own personal opinion, and I'll be happy to have that. I really did enjoy this book, and I planned on reading the second book, which I don't remember what it's called right now, in my July TBR, but there was just not enough time to secure the book for my July TBR, so we'll see how we go. Maybe I'll have it in my August TBR, or maybe I won't read the second book, I don't know, but I did enjoy this book. For what it was pretty good. The basic premise of this book is that it follows an adult scythe who recruits 2 children who he trains to become scythes. There is more to the story than that. That is explaining it in its most simplistic form. But if you think that sounds enjoyable, then I definitely recommend you read this book because the execution follows incredibly close to the premise, and I really appreciate that. I've had other books in the past where the premise sounds amazing. Last Mile in Thunder City is a great example of this. The premise sounds so amazing, and then the execution falls rather flat. It did not fall flat at all in this book. The execution really held to the premise, and I highly recommend it. If the Grim Reaper / Angel of Death life sounds in any way interesting to you, written in a fictional work, then I definitely recommend it because you'll have a great time with Scythe by Neil Shusterman. So I'm going to be putting this book into my sci-fi area, which is going to be interesting because I market it as a fantasy, but since it is sci-fi, I'll be putting it over in my sci-fi area, which is right over here. In fact, it has become my new sci-fi display book, because as much as I do absolutely love Bot Wars, and the moment I can get a copy of Meta Rise, I will definitely read it. JVK, you're holding out on me. I do want to advertise Scythe a little more because I do love this book, and I believe it should have some airtime, and it's perfectly placed to have adequate airtime. So let's move on to the next book that I read in June 2020, and that was the concluding book to the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. This is a YA fantasy by J.K. Rowling, as I said, last book in the series. So I'm not going to give away anything in this book because all of it is a spoiler, but this is the final book where everything that has been discussed and everything that we've been leading up to finally plays out in this very much action-packed final book. I will say that despite the fact that I did end up giving this book 5 stars, I do feel that the first half of this book is a little meandering, and not all of it is. I came into this book with a little bit of anxiety, into my reread with a little bit of anxiety, because I remember how meandering that first half is. It's not as meandering as I thought it was, because the first quarter of the book is set in one place, and it's more the second quarter of the book where things become a little meandering. But by the time we get to the third quarter of the book, everyone knows what it is that they need to do, and we just set about doing it, and it turns into a very high action conclusion to what has been an absolutely amazing series. Despite the fact that there are a number of things in the first half of the book that I don't necessarily enjoy reading, the second half of this book is just so amazing that it more than makes up for the first half of the book. So I still give this book 5 stars, because the second half of the book alone is worth those 5 stars, and anything else that I enjoyed would deserve even more than the maximum amount of stars that I can give this book. So ultimately I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed my reread of the Harry Potter series, and if you guys would like for me to do a Harry Potter series discussion as a whole, including all of the books, then let me know and I will certainly do that. But in the meantime, I enjoyed this book a lot, 5 stars, and it will be the final book in my Harry Potter shelf. And there is my completed Harry Potter shelf. It's really interesting because I am reading Cursed Child in the month of July. I have it right behind me. I'm reading this book this month. I don't know where I'm going to put it in the shelf because it's pretty full. I may have to lay it flat on top of the other Harry Potter books. I don't know. But this shelf is pretty much filled to the capacity now, and I'm really happy that I have a Harry Potter shelf. That makes me incredibly happy because it is my second favourite series of all time. So we have 3 more books to get through. The next book that I read was Firefight by Brandon Sanderson. This is a superhero sci-fi book, the second book in the Reckoners series. The first book is right here, and it's called Steelheart. I enjoyed Steelheart so much that I couldn't wait to get onto Firefight. There was a month's delay between Steelheart and Firefight because I needed to get Firefight ordered in. So I was incredibly excited once I finally got to sit down and read this book, but I think the wait kind of ruined some of the book for me because it wasn't as good as I was imagining it to be, which is incredibly disappointing because I'm really a massive fan of Brandon Sanderson. I love his works, but as I've always said, if I find a Brandon Sanderson book that I don't like, I am going to be honest about it, and overall, I'm not a fan of this second book in the series. I think I have ordered Calamity, which is the third and final book in the Reckoners series, but I don't know if I have, and so it's, yeah, it's just, I don't know, if I have, yay, I will read it because I've already ordered it, so I might as well read it, and if I haven't, then I'm happy to let this series go, because this book really did disappoint me. But if you have read the entire Reckoners series, can you please let me know in the comment section below, without spoiling anything, if the third book is much better than the second book? There is a thing out there called middle book syndrome, and that could be all that this is, just a little dip in the series, but it ends spectacularly well with the final book. So if you've read it and you know that this is the case with the Reckoners series, can you please let me know? But this is the next book that I read in June of 2020, and I'm just trying to find out what I rated it. I gave it 3 stars. Yeah, so that's what I mean. There were good parts, there were not so good parts, there were parts I enjoyed and parts I didn't. It got an average rating from me, unlike its predecessor, Steelheart, which received 5 stars. So I'm going to now put this into my Brandon Sanderson section, which is over here. Now, I know you can't completely see this shelf, but just in case you're wondering, this shelf now contains the first Mistborn era series, the Final Empire, which is displayed, the Well of Ascension, which is the second book in that series, and Hero of Ages, which is the third book in that series. Then I have the first book for the Wax and Wayne series, the second Mistborn era. The first book is The Alloy of Law, it's right there. Then we have Steelheart, and then after Steelheart 2, Firefight. So now you know what's going on with my Brandon Sanderson shelf if it wasn't clear enough to begin with. So we have 2 more books to discuss, and both of those books are going to end up on the same shelf, the dystopian shelf. So the second last book that I read in the month of June 2020 was the third book in the selection series called The One. You guys, I have an author crush, and that author crush is on Kiera Cass, because the first 3 books of this series have all been absolute gold to me. The first book was a lot of fun. The second book was fun, but then there were moments when Kiera Cass really went there, and wow, it just blew me away. I wasn't expecting it, but it was still good. And the third book was really good as well. So I am loving this series so much. If you don't know the basic premise of the selection as a whole, it follows the protagonist, whose name is America Singer, who you have on the cover there, who enters into an event that we might as well call The Bachelor. So it's kind of like The Bachelor, but the difference is that instead of having some unknown guy that is The Bachelor, in this dystopian world, the prince takes on the role of the bachelor, and he is trying to find the love of his life, and whoever ends up winning that competition not only will become his bride, but because he is the prince, will also become the princess. The series also deals with a bit of drama, because there are rebels out there who are actively showing that they are very much against the class/caste system that has been forced and thrust upon them. So they are actively trying to fight back. That is a big part of the series as well. So don't just think the series is just set in a castle and it's just about princessy-ness, because it's not at all. There's a lot of action that occurs thanks to the rebels that are out there. But all in all, it's just a great series. I can't think of anything that I don't love about the series so far. Now, I don't have the 4th book on my July TBR, which is really frustrating to me because I want to read the 4th book, but my bookstore was not able to get in on time, and I can understand that, especially with COVID-19, things have been slowed down. But the next book is called The Air, and I'm really looking forward to reading that book, so I will get to it as soon as that book is available. But I gave this book, the 3rd book in the series, the selection series, The One, 5 stars, and I will now put it on my dystopian bookshelf. Well, I think that's the best that I can do for now with my dystopian shelf, considering I do have one more book that I need to add, and that is the final book that I read this month, which is the 2nd book in the Divergent series, Insurgent, by Veronica Roth. The first book of the Divergent series does set things up, as you would imagine, and it follows our protagonist, Triss Pryor, who was born into a faction. There are 5 factions in this dystopian world that everyone needs to be a part of one of those factions, and if you don't end up integrating yourself into a faction, you become factionless, which is kind of like you become homeless. But otherwise, everyone else is in a faction, and so you are therefore most likely going to be born into a faction. Triss Pryor was born into a particular faction, and at the start of book 1, she ends up being tested to see which faction would be the best faction for her, because she's about to come of age, and when you come of age, you get placed to where it is that you're meant to go and remain for the rest of your adult life. However, what makes this series so intriguing is that even though you're being tested and these tests are going to show you which is truly the best faction for you and not necessarily just the faction you were born into, you get to ultimately decide which faction you will go into. So even if the test says, I think you would do best in this faction, but you like this faction more, which hasn't come up as a good result for you, you can still go into that faction. You get to choose. This test is just meant to give you some sort of an idea. But while Triss is there, she proves positive for more than one faction, which makes her what they call divergent, and there are people out there that are hunting divergence because they have more than a one-track mind. You can see how it's a dystopian. Anyway, on the day of choosing, Triss ends up choosing the faction she's going to go into. I don't want to say too much, but I will say she does leave her faction she was born in behind for another faction that she wants to be a part of, and so we get to learn more about that faction that she goes into and everything else about this world as a whole. The way that the first book ended, it ended in a way where I had no idea where the second book was going to go. It kind of left things really open-ended. And in the second book, what we get, unlike in the first one, is we get to venture around to pretty much all of the rest of the factions that we haven't already seen yet. So other than getting a small description, which we do in the first book, we actually get to go there. We are shown rather than told, which is something I've been saying a lot this month. We are shown these factions, and I really did appreciate that. However, the story as a whole, I did not really appreciate at all. I think it's great that Veronica Roth had those little gems to take us into all the different factions so we could see them for ourselves, but the story plot as a whole for this book just really wasn't one that I enjoyed. So I end up giving this book 3 stars. I don't know, and it's kind of like with Scythe, I don't know if I've ordered the third and I believe final book in the series, which is called Allegiant, or not, but I also said this on my Goodreads review. If I have and it comes in, I will read it, but if I haven't, I don't plan on going out of my way to order Allegiant, because Insurgent did disappoint me. I gave it 3 stars, but I would still ultimately say it disappointed me, unlike Divergent, so I'm not going to go out of my way to find the book, but if it turns out that I've already ordered it and it comes in, I will read it because I've already ordered it. But we'll see how we go. Anyway, this book is going to go onto the dystopian shelf, so I'll put that there right now. So there we go. That's now how I'll have my dystopian shelf. And I think it's a good idea because I can separate the selection from everything else. So we have the selection series here, selection 1, 2 copies of 2, and the third one. And over here we have Hunger Games 1, Hunger Games 2, and then Divergent 1 and Divergent 2. And that is where we will leave it. All in all, I read 10 books this month. My goal was to read 12, so I missed 2. But those 2 that I did miss, at least at the moment, the plan is that I'm carrying them over to July, and they will be the first 2 books that I read in the month of July, which is Shadows of Self, which is the 5th book in the Mistborn series, the 2nd book in the second Mistborn era series, and also the 5th book in the Vampire Academy series, which at the moment I don't recall what it is called. But there we go. That is my wrap up for the month of June 2020. How did your reading month go? I hope that it went well. I'm going to leave that there and let you guys go. Peace, blessings, and so much love. I will be back again on Thursday for my midweek vlog, my first midweek vlog for July, so I can catch you guys up on everything that's been going on there, everything that you've missed. But till then, thank you so much for watching. I post videos every Monday, Thursday, and Sunday with reviews in between, and I'll see you again soon. Happy reading! Mwah. Bye guys! Bye!